Good morning. I'm Jack Miles, professor of English and Religious Studies at the University of California, Irvine, the one professor in this enormous university who has the word religion in his title. I'm also, appropriately enough, the director of UCI's program in Religious Studies. And I've been asked to offer a few remarks this morning on the place of religion in public life. These days, when I'm asked to comment on religion in public life, 9 times out of 10, the questioner wants me to say something about religion and violence, about religion and the Middle East, about Islam and the West. And these are very important topics, very, very grievous topics. Last year, 2014, 12,282 people died in Iraq. That is the equivalent in deaths in the United States of 110,000 people, which is twice the number of dead in the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War went on for decades, but these Iraqis have all died in 1 year. This mass death has not been brought about primarily by any kind of American military involvement. The Americans have not entirely left Iraq, but our activity there is reduced down to a very minor level. Most of these deaths have come about by warfare among the Sunni and Shia of Iraq, with some casualties also among the minority religions of that country, such as the Yazidi and the Christian. Of course, this has to concern us. And it's a natural subject for those who are interested in religion in any way to be interested in. Now, in what way can the study of religion or the involvement of religiously knowledgeable people make any kind of difference in an ongoing conflagration of that sort? Let me take the particular case of Jews and Arabs fighting over the Holy Land. We hear about the peace process all the time, about high-level meetings involving Secretary of State John Kerry and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and various mediators like George Mitchell. And these meetings have failed so far to produce a result. They have failed to bring peace to that part of the world. Meanwhile, entirely below the radar, meetings are taking place between Palestinians and Israelis, between American Jews and American Muslims, even Palestinian Americans and Jewish Americans. Often these groups are led by the religious leaders of the respective parties. Rarely does anything of this sort make the headlines. And yet the changes that can take place because of that kind of activity are changes not in government, but in society. But let me point out something about democratic governance. It responds to society. It responds to the popular will. So if you are disappointed with what your government is doing, what you must do is organize resistance to that government, organize a campaign for a rival candidate who might do what you think right for your country. This is as familiar as Civics 101 in the study of the American system. But changes of that sort take place in religious life as well, and where there is violence that is fueled in part by religious ideology, peacemaking efforts at the popular level have a chance and sometimes can bring about the social change that can, over time, mediate the political change that we need. It seems rather clear that direct political action, for example, in the Israel-Palestine theater, has failed after 50 years of trying. Perhaps it makes sense to give these other avenues a shot. Now, I begin with that, not because I want to spend all our time this morning talking about it, but because it's the more familiar illustration of the same process that I would like now for us to look at in another instance. And that is the instance of religion and global warming, or religion and, more broadly, the ecological health of planet Earth, the only habitat we have. If you study the history of the extinctions of animals over time, most of them go extinct because their habitat changes so drastically around them that they can no longer sustain their own lives. But we, the human species, are in the process of fouling our own nest. We're in the process, slowly but surely, of making human life impossible on the only home, in the only home that we have. Now, what, I hear you cry, does religion have to do with that? Scientists, aren't they the ones who are always talking about global warming? We don't hear religious leaders talking about it at all. Or do we? Well, the scientists have been sounding the alarm, and we must all be deeply grateful to them for doing that for a long while now. But their alarms sounding alone has not changed the will of governments. There was an enormous amount of hope for the Copenhagen conference in midwinter 2011. But President Obama didn't even attend that conference. Last night, President Obama delivered his State of the Union address, calling for a massive new effort to address this global challenge. But he didn't attend the Copenhagen conference. Why was he talking differently in his State of the Union than he spoke, than his actions spoke in 2011? It's because in 2011 he was still facing future elections. And elections in the United States are settled by just a few votes on one side or the other. So he had to keep a low profile on an issue that at that time might have meant that taking the wrong position could turn just enough voters against you to swing an election. Now he doesn't have to face any more elections, so he can tell the truth as he sees it. And yet, because he doesn't face any more elections and because his opposition now controls both houses of Congress, one cannot be particularly optimistic that any decisive action on global warming will be forthcoming from the American government as we now know it. But can anything be done about that? I return to my analogy in the question of religious violence in the Middle East, including Israel. If you wish to change government, you must change society. And that begins at the grassroots level, and it begins with small efforts. I've taught a course here at UCI on religion and ecology. One of the books that I've used is this book called A Greener Faith. The subtitle is Religious Environmentalism and Our Planet's Future. The author is Roger S. Gottlieb. Professor Gottlieb examines efforts by Jews, by Christians, by Muslims, by various groups, all inspired by different religious traditions, to address some particular ecological challenge in their home area. For example, mountaintop clearing, strip mining in West Virginia. There are many other examples in the book. Scarcely any one of them made headlines at the time that it was taking place. And I give Professor Gottlieb credit for observing that this movement was quietly beginning all over the United States and that it was mobilizing the resources of religion in all these places at the same time. Another resource that I use in this class, another illustration, a very, very grim one, is called The Last Feast of the Crocodiles. What it presents is competition among different animals, hippopotamuses, baboons, impalas, gazelles, even elephants and giraffes, over the last large water hole in a particular national park in South Africa late in a long-lasting drought. And as I see these animals fighting to the death for those last drinks of water, I think about the various nations of the world as different species, all fighting for the last scraps of whatever indispensable industrial metal or oil resource or water itself. Water, we're told again and again, is the new oil. And this picture of desperate, unending, to the death violence is what will face us unless we can mobilize ourselves in time to bring about in advance a peaceful solution to the battle worldwide for natural resources. Now you may say, well, that's very interesting, but it's surely very, very small, and Professor Gottlieb must be a very, very lonely fellow. But it's not quite true. Here is the Oxford Handbook of Religion and Ecology, not a small book, a big book, talking about a great many people on various different fronts, addressing various different ecological issues, but in every case, not that these people would ever refuse to cooperate with government, but essentially they are dealing with the citizens who then will shape the government to do what has to be done. Religion we ordinarily, or at least many of us, associate with the quiet interior of churches, people with their hands joined and their heads bowed in prayer, silence and retreat, and the interior life, things of that sort. Is there any link between all of that and the ecological crisis? The one seems so exterior. What could be more exterior than the drought that's been affecting the whole of California over the last several years? But it is possible to draw connections even to that aspect of religion, and that is something that has been done in this book with a very colorful, if somewhat mysterious, perhaps appropriately mysterious title, The Blue Sapphire of the Mind. And the subtitle is Notes for a Contemplative Ecology. So what if you think you can't do anything about ecology? Well, perhaps there may be in a work like this something that can change a mind and then change a set of actions. What sort of actions might change? I enlarged my carbon footprint just a bit by driving to work today and burning a little extra gasoline. Once I'm retired, I won't have to drive to work anymore, and so my carbon footprint will shrink. But if I decide to take a vacation in Australia, for no reason other than that I'm curious about kangaroos, my carbon footprint will explode with growth. The most wasteful expenditure of travel fuel is recreational travel. It's tourism. Now I know that many people around the world depend on the tourist dollar for their livelihood, but over time perhaps an adjustment could be made. And just as we're now more interested in eating local food, we might develop over time more interest in recreating at home and making our own home areas so beautiful and so attractive and so enjoyable that they would be tourist destinations even if we were the only tourists who ever came there. And this way, the overall expenditure of gasoline for no necessary purpose, only for recreation, could go down. And, you know, the Benedictine monks of old took three vows. One was of poverty. They lived very simply. Everything they owned belonged to the monastery. Another was chastity. They were celibates. They did not marry. But the third, usually forgotten, was stability. They lived in the monastery that they joined for the rest of their lives. they did not travel. Instead, they made their monasteries into destinations. Changes as profound as that, changes in our assumption that if you have a vacation, you must take a trip. A staycation, well, not really a vacation, is it? It's a sorry excuse for a vacation. This year, the principal professional association of university professors of religious studies held its annual meeting in San Diego. This is the American Academy of Religion. When you attend this meeting, there's always a great book exhibition hall where all the publishers display their wares and the professors walk around and collect free samples in big bags like this, AAR. This is the one from 2008. But this year, 2014, late in 2014, the current president of the organization, Professor Lori Zoloth of Northwestern University, decided to make ecology the theme of the entire meeting. It was the subject of her presidential address, and she warmly and successfully encouraged the members to see if they could not make their ordinary professional pursuits address this supremely important subject. By the count of a New York Times reporter, fully 1/3 of the papers delivered at a conference attended by about 9,000 conference attendees were devoted to that subject. Her most shocking suggestion was that in order to reduce their carbon footprints, every third year, I believe, was her proposal, the organization should cancel its annual meeting, take the money otherwise spent, and attempt outreach into their local communities to bring about the needed social attitudinal shift that in turn might make possible the political action that is needed to save the planet. I'd like to mention one other figure, one other work, if I may be so boastful. This work behind me here is the Norton Anthology of World Religions, of which I am the general editor. The Norton Anthology of World Religions anthologizes primary texts in 6 different religious traditions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, a religion of China, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. By primary texts, what we mean are texts that were produced by and for the practitioners of these religions rather than by professors like me talking about them or reporters reporting about them. Just at the very end of 2 of these traditions, you find statements linking religious traditions and ecology. One of these is very serious, and one is very playful. The serious one is a joint declaration by Pope John Paul II with Greek Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew of Istanbul or Constantinople on the need for a worldwide mobilization to save the human planet for the human race. It's not long, but it's very symbolic because it represented opinions by 2 religious leaders who together lead 2.5 billion people. The playful one, which I initially thought we ought not include because I thought we would be mocked because of it, is the very end, the very last selection in the Buddhism anthology. And it is called the Smokey the Bear Sutta. Now, suttas in Buddhism are important statements, treatises, disquisitions that have been produced over the entire course of that very long and very widespread and variegated tradition. There are sutras or suttas that go back to Buddha himself. There are many that were written by others, though they are attributed to Buddha. So Gary Snyder, the American poet, wittily spoke in the name of Smokey the Bear and the Buddha simultaneously about America's forests and Americans' responsibility to care for the natural reality of America that they must care for and they must live with. I thought it was quite appropriate that at the end of these very long stories about very widespread and long-lasting religions, this topic, the topic of the world's ecological health and what the religions can do about it, should have come to the fore. I hope that those who purchase this work, it's about to come out in a 6-volume paperback edition, won't overlook those 2 little texts. Thank you.